Okay, welcome everybody to Making Worlds Cooperative Bookstore and Social Center. My name is Malo Kanuga. I'm a member of the Working Cooperative here, and very happy to be able to host a series of conversations, political education here, and very happy to be able to host a series of okay, all right. So where were we in the feedback loop? A series of conversations and workshops, political education situations where we come together and discuss our own personal experiences with debt, carrying debt, and what it looks like to organize in the terrain of debt. I've learned a lot from the Debt Collective, who are the organizers and main instigators of this series. And over the last 10 plus years, of my experience learning and working with them around debt organizing. There are a couple other co-sponsors to this event. There's the Labor for Higher Ed, and remind me if there's a third, but beyond Debt Collective, Making Worlds, and Labor.
Higher Education Labor United.
Higher Education Labor United. HELU, right, okay, yes. And today we are going to be focusing on the power of storytelling, and we have a very excellent comrade here to help us work through those ideas. Chenjerai Kumanyika, a communications scholar, educator, podcast producer, host of a number of award-winning and really powerful narrative-driven podcasts, including Uncivil and a handful of others. Chenjerai is also the contributor to a recent anthology of writing on storytelling that the Moth has put out called How to Tell a Story. And so it's going to be bringing some of the skills and experiences of storytelling, the power of storytelling in organizing to bear into this conversation. I'm going to pass the microphone off to Jason Wozniak, organizer of the Debt Collective, to introduce and welcome you all to take the workshop off. Yeah.
Thank you, Malo. Thank you, everyone that's watching outside of this space. Malo, really appreciate all the efforts that you and the crew at Making Worlds has made to help make this event possible in such a beautiful space. For those of you that don't, I think you said it, but we're in Philadelphia, and this is a nice collaboration between a lot of different groups. So Pennsylvania Debt Collective is one of the branches of the nationwide Debt Collective, and I think Debt Collective is most well known for its work on student debt, but we also are the nation's first debtors union, and we organize around a variety of debtor types, so not just student debt, but also housing debt, automobile debt. Andrew Ross has a recent story in the New York Times about that. Carceral debt, medical debt, a variety of different debt types. And one of the things that we try to do at Debt Collective is talk about how all these different debt types are coming from the same source, which is an exploitative, racial capitalist, patriarchal, neo-colonialist, political economic system here in the United States, but also elsewhere. Hey, Chris.
Hey, what up?
So we have people coming in as we speak with the school. So those of you that are watching on the screen, there might be a couple of disruptions. But again, I think this is a really important point that we want to emphasize over and over again, is that we're driven into debt because wages are held low artificially. We're driven into debt because that's the only way that so many of us can survive. And debt impacts different people differently across time and space, and that's really important to emphasize as well. That a lot of the debt types that I just mentioned are historically and still to this day impacting BIPOC folks most heavily, and the burdens the heaviest there. So one of the things that we do at Debt Collective and have been doing for a long time is to organize debtors' assemblies. And I want to mention this because it's very relevant to the workshop that we're going to do tonight, and that we're going to encourage people here to participate in, as well as people that are watching from outside this room. And in debtors' assemblies, one of the things we try to do is literally assemble debtors. And this might seem like a simple thing and a basic thing, but it's actually really hard to do for a variety of reasons that I think are worth mentioning at the get-go. We, as debtors, often are meant to feel that we've done something wrong. We're meant to feel that we're guilty of not succeeding, whatever that means, in this crazy hyper-capitalist system. And a lot of debtors live with a lot of guilt and shame for the debts that we carry. And the reason why that's so significant is because when we live with that guilt or shame and we don't want to talk about our debt out loud with others, it's really hard to build debtor power. And so one of the things that we try and do in debtors assemblies and in encounters like this is to say, okay, how can we come together as debtors without the stigma of shame, without the stigma of failure, etc., to talk about our struggles out loud, to talk about the ways in which we are not alone, that there are many debtors just like us and debtors that have done absolutely nothing wrong to be in the situation that they're in. And we aim to talk about these things in public because by talking about that in public, we can start to build coalition power and solidarity. And it's only through collective power, i.e. debtors unions, that we can build the power that we need in order to take on some of the behemoth monsters that I mentioned earlier, racial capitalist, patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're trying to accomplish tonight and in other events that we have is like, how do we shape stories about indebted life that are not just compelling, insofar as the story itself keeps us riveted or even not just therapeutic, because a lot of this can be really therapeutic. It's really important to talk about debt struggle with others in public, to get this off our chests, you might say, to rid ourselves of this sense of failure, of guilt that we're constantly is imposed on us. But it's meant to be therapeutic, but it's not just that. And this came up in the last session we had. Asia and Jacobs made this point really well. That part of the reason of telling that narrative is to help it sharpen our political analysis of the debt society. And so one of the things that we always want to do when we create these stories, and Chenjerai is going to talk a lot about this, is how do these stories that we're telling help us do better analysis of the political economic system that we're in? How do they help us build an analysis that helps us build power? And so on the one hand, this is both a gathering to build collective solidarity, to build friendship, to build relation amongst debtors, and that can be very helpful, therapeutic. But on the other hand, it also has this aim of helping us do a better diagnosis of the situation that we're in and what caused the situation that we're in. And I just want to emphasize this because as we're building the stories here tonight, as we're hearing from other people, if we can keep in mind this question of like, okay, how does this help us realize what monsters we're up against and how to take them down? And like, those are the kind of stories that eventually, I think, lead to some of this liberation from some of these things that I previously mentioned. So I'm going to turn this over to Chenjerai. For those of you that are watching and for those people here, thank you again. And just to mention that this is going to be like a participatory workshop where there's going to be different moments we'll be asked to write things down. We'll be asked to share things, and people should feel comfortable sharing to the degree they feel, but also realizing that we want to create safe spaces for the possibility to just like speak the truth about the different things that we've lived and gone through. How you doing? Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Chenjerai. Thank you again for coming, everyone. Thank you, Making Worlds. And thank you, Chenjerai, for doing this. This is huge.
Oh, of course, yeah. I'm learning how to accept thanks, but I'm sending that gratitude right back out to everybody equally, right, for us all assembling. So, yeah, I'm somebody who talks too much, and I talk too long. The older I get, it's harder to be, brief. I don't know if anyone else shares that, feels like they share that struggle. And one of the things I noticed is that I have really caring and sincere comrades and friends and family who, when I start telling them stories, they really want to hear it. You know what I'm saying? They're tuned in, but I have a tendency to build in so many details and so much context that the story is kind of I think of like a hammock, you know what I mean? Or like a really tray made out of really light wood that you just keep piling shit on till eventually it just breaks, right? But they're just like, I don't know if you've ever been in this experience of hearing someone's story where you're really trying to hear them, but after a while, it starts to be a struggle, right? Now, there's a craft of storytelling, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit to talk about the context. But one thing that was occurring to me as I was listening to Jason talk is that the forces that are arrayed against our movements, that are arrayed against, forms of justice, that are trying to hold up the systems that hold us down, they put a lot of money into storytelling, a lot of resources and time to storytelling, right? Like they don't just get up and go, I'm just gonna be my authentic self, right? And then just let it rip. They actually plan, they have workshops, they have talking points, they have people, all kinds of jobs and capacities hired to make sure that their messages are gonna be really attractive, right, to people in a certain way. And so I think that I'm really thankful to everyone here making Worlds and Debt Collective for actually creating space, because it's hard for us to do that. That's just one of the things that underscores the importance of collectivity, right? Because one of the things that does, Jason was just pointing this out, is it stops us from having space to even do things like this, right? To gather and to think through, like, how do I want to share this story and to have these forms of political education. I just want to underscore that, this debt assembly strategy, I was sort of unsure about what I could contribute, because the debt strike movement has been so successful in getting this message out. And when I started to first, learn about thinking about debt like this, right? Like I grew up, like I'm sure many of you, feeling like, yeah, if you had debt, you failed. You did something wrong, you made the wrong choices, you got a little too greedy, a little too reckless, you weren't disciplined financially, you didn't have the right financial literacy. And it wasn't until I started really studying some of the work and some of the theory and some of the stories that I began to see how powerful this analysis of debt, it shifts sort of my understanding, and it gives me insight into some of the way these systems are working that I didn't get from other kinds of education, right? And so I think it is really a powerful point of analysis. Quickly, I also want to say, we had a couple of people come in, so hi to the folks on Zoom. I'm Chenjerai, and everybody that just came in, you're on, not Zoom, but you're on being broadcast on YouTube. We wanted to give some other folks other places the ability to participate. So here's what we're going to do. We do really intend this as a workshop. So shortly, I'm going to ask you all to come up with some ideas about your own stories about debt that the way it might have affected you, and to sort of share some ideas. So start in your minds thinking about ways that debt may have affected your life. But I do want to say that by way of, just a little bit more introduction. So I do work with an organization called the Moth. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Moth. It's a storytelling organization. I'm now on the board. I was the Moth storyteller, and it's a part of where I really understood the craft of storytelling, right? And this idea that like everybody can tell powerful stories, not just like the important people, right? But also, what does it mean? Because one of the things that the Moth does is, like when they were sort of vetting the stories that I might tell, they invite me to tell stories the same way you might around the dinner table, and they laugh and joke and say, "Oh, that was good," But then they kind of go in and go, "Okay, here's what I think the core of the story is," and it gets a little more serious, right? And I think that both of those things is important to validate the story, right? And that's going to become relevant because we're going to give feedback shortly. So these are like feedback rules. But it's important to validate what's working about a story, but also to kind of be willing to really think carefully about what's not working, what's too much, right? And that's what the Moth is really good at. Also, I make nonfiction narrative podcasts. And I worked with a company called Gimlet Media pretty early, and it's been made in civil, and I've done these other things. The reason why I say that is because some of the people I'm working with in those spaces they don't share necessarily the political analysis that I have, but they are really, in some ways that's good, right? Because they're really thinking about like, what's working? Is this story moving? What's compelling? And so that's kind of the place that I learned some of the things I'm going to share as ideas. And again, these are ideas about what might work. And I can imagine that in this room is already, and probably in the Zoom, there's a lot of storytelling knowledge. So I want all that to come in. We're just kind of kicking this off. I just want to be clear, I'm not setting myself as an expert. All right, so I think the first thing, that you want to think about when you're talking about debt and telling a story about debt, the first decision I think that you need to make, that we all need to make, is why am I telling this story? Jason pointed to one important function of storytelling, which is healing, right? It's therapeutic to become public about stuff that we're made to feel ashamed of. But if we're trying to do certain kinds of political work, and what I think we want to focus on here, there's also, I think, a persuasive component to it, right? Maybe we want to persuade people, we want to educate someone and help someone who may not understand, may want to understand, right? And I think that's the thing that I think you have to commit to right from the beginning, because otherwise we might kind of feel like, why do I have to explain myself to people, right? And we can feel like we're inappropriately justifying ourselves or something like that. And I don't think that that's what this is about. There's a long tradition in radical movements of political education, sharing one's story and sharing it particularly in ways that anticipate what people might be, not understand, right? So I think those are decisions you have to make right off the gate. The second thing is that there's a lot of different kinds of sharing, and when you're sharing a story, the question is really, what is a story? What makes a story different from other kinds of sharing? What I want to offer you is that, or what I think we should try, is that a story has a central character, central person in the beginning of it. Hopefully character isn't too offensive, you know what I'm saying? Dan's looking at me like, change, I'm not a character, bro. Don't do that to me. I'm a person. But a person at the center, right? Who goes through a journey of some kind, right? That has a conflict at the core of it. And then that conflict, I don't know if the conflict resolves, but the person goes from one place to some other. And so right now, what I want you to do is to start to think about a moment in your life, a kind of story that sort of meets that criteria that you might share. And what we're going to do in a minute is a lightning round. I want to have everybody actually talk about that around the room. So if there's stuff, again, we don't want to be public, don't share that. But before we get there, let me just invite you all in right from the gate and sort of say, I think that by default, we're supposed to be looking at some examples of debt storytelling too, right? Eventually, at some point. So yeah, we
got some really good ones coming out.
We do.
Too, from Maddie.
Yeah. I think, well, let me just say this. One of the default ways that people tell a debt story is they talk about how we got into debt, right? And the struggles to get out of it. And I think that in some ways probably has to be an element of almost every debt story if we really want to do the kind of work that we're committing to do here. But the thing I want to ask, and maybe also just invite your commentary on, is what are some of the different ways that debt affects people's lives beyond simply like the purely financial way? Like what does that debt do in people's lives? Does anyone want to jump in? I mean, I think I'll start us off and say, I think it definitely affects, I think, ability to achieve other life goals that you might want to achieve. There's a great debt story where a woman talks about her son who has a disability and needing to provide him with a certain kind of infrastructure in the home, and the way that her debt prevented her from being able to even provide and care for her family. But it really was a story in a way about her and her son. You see what I'm saying? So does anybody else have any other ideas or moments you want to bring in about how debt affects our lives?
I can think about like, hey everybody, Chris, like stuff, yes. Hey everybody, Chris, he and pronouns and Paul Robeson House Museum, shout out. I think about like debt service. right? The larger scale, we talk about like countries and whatnot, and the ways that their, economies have to be, oh, you got to make this payment, right? But even like on an individual level, I think about like knowing that they could do whatever or something could happen to me if I'm not making this payment month to month, right? So the idea of me leaving my job, the idea of me chasing a different ambition and going to figure it out. If that disrupts the sort of like debt service, then I'm putting putting more of my life at risk. So I think about like that. Yeah.
You know, that's powerful. And I also just want to make sure we lift up and don't forget what you're saying, that we're always trying to look at, debt is not purely individual, right? Like some of these same mechanisms we're talking about are applied to countries, right? To whole other groups of people. So we want to think about those relationships. But yeah, right? Like I did what you said, like the way that debt stops me even from imagining what else I could be doing, including organizing.
Right.
Like, no, I gotta work.
It's de-radicalizing.
De-radicalizing. Yeah, say more.
Well, hi, I'm Jim, he, him pronouns, I can't remember what else he said. Yeah, so what's happened, is this too close? What's happened to me is that I've had to choose to involve myself. I get into debt and I have to be more and more and more in the system. At this point, I'm 62 and I'm starting a new career because of debt. I'm about to graduate from nursing school and start as a nurse at 62 to be able to retire my debt and have some money for retirement.
Wow.
And so my politics, my pragmatic politics, has basically changed from being a revolutionary anarchist to being a democratic socialist. And that's because I can't live a life where I'm a squatter and just survive. I have to feed all this debt infrastructure that I've created.
100%. Does anyone else want to come in? Thank you for sharing that. That's both really good examples. Anyone else want to share one more example in the room to talk about the kinds of debt story, places where debt impacts us?
Can I just add that?
Yeah.
You said at the end that you created, and I think one of the things we should think about is not placing the blame on ourselves. That we are part of this system. The system has been on longer than I think about the book by David Graeber called That, and that ideology, this tradition, has been around longer than capitalism, and something that's ingrained in us. And we may not see it, but it's everywhere. I think the first reaction is to blame yourself, but I think the more we learn and the more we realize, it's not us. It's the whole thing, and I think it's an important first step. It's just not to blame yourself. By the way, I'm Steve. Shout out to Paul Rhodes and us.
Nice.
But yeah, Steve, but yeah, that's all I'd say.
Yeah, and thank you so much for saying that, Steve, and I think that's really supportive. I would challenge you on one thing. You said I think that's a first step, and I think there's a way in which we can think about the storytelling as a first step. And the storytelling is a process through which we come to understand the thing you're saying. You see what I'm saying? When we hear, we're going to share some resources about this, but seeing people learn about the industries of debt, is powerful to really see that take precise shape, to learn about those mechanisms, and then reflect on one's experiences and go, oh, this wasn't about my choices. So thank you so much for pointing this out, and I hope that we can walk into that. I just want to keep things moving a minute, but don't forget your point. So the things that we have in the room right now, starting a new career at one's point and having to maybe shift one's sort of the way one is involved politically, maybe wanting to do something other than your current job, but not being able to do it because of debt. Those are places where a story can start. That's a little bit different than just saying, hey, I'm this person and I have debt. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? So why don't we I'll give everybody I know this is not a lot of time. We're trying to be mindful of time. Can I give everyone, maybe take 2 minutes to just scribble down just an idea or a moment that impacted your life that you might want to share. It could be a conversation. It could be the conversation with a family member. It could be a job interview. could be a organizing moment, although in some ways I would, invite us to think about things other than that so that things don't immediately appear so political for people who might not want to start from that point. So everybody maybe write down a moment and then let's just share and see what we got. Thanks.
Awesome, do my phone.
Cool. And this is going to be a lightning round, so please pardon me, I'm really going to hold people to that 1 minute.
I'm gonna take 2 minutes.
Oh, well, 2 minutes to scribble it down.
Oh,
When you
okay.
share. You got another minute. You're good. Yeah, let me just flip your paper real quick. And again, folks, I think this goes without saying, we're all really smart, sophisticated, critical people, but this is all gonna be validated when we do this. Nobody has to have this all figured out, especially at this moment. The first thing is to kind of brainstorm and get some stuff out there. So. All right, why don't we just kind of go around the room and I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't want to, our people who are watching via live stream, maybe you jotted down an idea, but I don't think we're going to be able to hear this time, but keep in mind, still a good idea to get your ideas going. All right, why don't we start here and just go around. You want to share yours? Remember, you got 1 minute. What's your name? Say your name too. So
My name is John.
Would you like some of the time for you?
Yes.
I'll time for you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
My name is John from Alaska, and I grew up in a community that actually used debt, purposely going into debt. Personally, they came together, my parents came together to put all of their assets into a trust in a community, like house, land, things like that, and then they could personally go, they could amass credit and then debt. And then they would just go bankrupt. They would use it all and go bankrupt. And they could do that because they would kind of work through the guilt, the shame, the things that you're not supposed to, they kind of felt that the whole system was stacked against them, so they would find ways to just work the system instead of feeling worked by it.
Right.
And they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have.
Consciously, intentionally using bankruptcy.
Yes, they would purposely go into debt and then take the things that they bought and give it to, enrich their lives and try to turn as much of this into capital as you can. But because they didn't own anything,
Thank you, John.
nobody could collect anything.
Thank you. We're gonna develop that. I think that's fascinating. Maybe we'll get to it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paul, he, him pronouns. I'm living down in Delaware right now. And so I lost my leg in 2020 because of a skiing accident, and I was in the hospital for 90 some days. And then a lot of ICU days, and it was a private hospital. So, the insurance didn't really cover everything. By the time I left, my bill was, $250,000, right? And that just kind of exists now as a specter, right? So they're not going to go to collections or anything because they won't do that, but could do that. A whole bunch of things that I'm not smart enough to really understand fully. But, I know that I really can't be saving a whole lot of money. And when I have some extra money, it has to go towards paying that down, which is, never gonna be paid down. I'm a teacher, so, 46,000 a year, it's not enough to make a dent in my debt. Kind of fun. All right, so that's me.
Your name again?
Paul.
Paul.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's clearly, that's a powerful story.
Hi, Sarika, she, her pronouns. I think, so I just turned 40 a couple of weeks ago, and I just had this moment of like, just feeling down and just, because I have all this debt, right? I'm like, I'm 40, I should be at a certain place in my life, and I have this shadow just kind of hanging over me, right? I have 3 degrees, and it's just, but that debt hasn't gone away, right? I'm still a couple $1,000s in debt, and it's depressing, actually. I know I shouldn't, it's depressing. I don't know. That's my moment, just feeling a little low at 40, and just, I want this to go away. But not making enough as a social worker. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure a lot of us can relate. We passed this way. Real very quickly, the story I will share, I would have not shared yet publicly, actually goes further back in my life while I was in college, and I wound up in jail because of parking ticket debt that I had just behind the campus. So yeah, that was my first time in jail, which for an activist is shameful. Should have been in jail before that. But anyway, yeah, that was the moment. So I'll just leave it there and keep it moving.
Yeah, I'm Steve, he, him, and I have a short story about that. And it goes back, and I think it's part of the big theme is the student loan debt. I know that bunch is doing amazing things to address that. And the activism associates, a shout to them, so back in my day, I'm well into my 40s, and the way some of the student loan debts were set up back in those days was private companies will loan you the money, and when you would pay the private company the bank back, and if you default, because they would normally loan, punk kids thousands of dollars like that. If you defaulted, the government would put the bill. So I had one of those loans, and I, being a young guy, and I literally think I screwed up the check. Back in those days, you literally would write a check, send it, and I was off by like 5 cents. It really was a minuscule amount. And and then I get a letter later. They're trying to default on my loan. They wanted me to default on my loan. They're pushing me out. And I somehow was able to talk my way out. Like, please don't let me default on this loan. Please. And luckily for me, they let me just pay off my loans and continue to do so. But it was this close. My life could have been very, very different. Had this one person answering the phone treated me differently. But anyway, that's my story. Sorry.
Wow, that's powerful. That it sounds like maybe the phone call is an interesting moment to explore. Yes.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nick Marcells, he, him pronouns. The story that I'll just mention on is sort of on and off conversations with my mom. In our family, we've sometimes had health insurance, sometimes not, underinsured, whatnot. And just sort of like on and off of like medical debt or medical bills, and just sort of like dealing with those, and just the, consistent struggle and time that takes. And just sort of like the toll that takes to sort of, continue like on and off of figuring, what's the bill that I owe this time? What is it, here? And, just trying to make either like a payment plan or like X, Y, and Z, and, figuring all these things out that really don't need to exist. And just, it's, crazy of, the world that we sort of have constructed to try to say, oh, well, you're going to have to go into debt because of healthcare or education, et cetera. And, really just seeing that, stress that, I've seen on, my own family and seen in others, just is, powerful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dana, she, her pronouns. For the past couple of years, I've been my grandmother's power of attorney since my father passed away. And I had to basically help her get into public nursing home over the past couple of years. And in one of our less business-like conversations, we were talking about closing out some of her credit cards. But she realized over living in the world that that would impact her credit score. And I said, well, you don't really have to care about your credit score. Like, you have no money, you're on Medicaid, and you're going into a public-run nursing home. And she just said to me, it doesn't matter. I don't want them to know my credit score is bad. And I was just like, who? Like, who would know this? But I think there was this kind of like feeling of morality coming through, and she just couldn't exist with a lower credit score than she had been used to. So it was a really moving situation we talked about.
Thank you. I'll time for you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Jim. Again, de-radicalization story. So it's summer 2020. The George Floyd uprising is happening in my neighborhood. I live in this neighborhood. And my heart was out on the streets, and I couldn't go out because if I got arrested, this program that I'm in now, they kick me out. And I would never be able to get that. Because I'm too old to start something all over new. I even tried finding someone, a safety button, like someone else who didn't want to get arrested, so we could kind of go out and kind of make sure. And I wasn't able to work that out. So I did try, but there I was like, I just knew that I could not go out and risk arrest.
That's so powerful. And I think that smallness of that moment, or that intimacy of that moment of you thinking through and struggling, can make a really interesting story. So thank you. Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Julian, he, him. There's many stories of that, but the biggest one is I decided to pursue activism back in Colombia. So I left, loved it, stayed there for 13 years, and created business, family, everything. All of a sudden, the debt started coming in, and that created a lot more issues in my family, even emotionally, than the immigrant concept of the way that I was brought over to the US kicked in, and it became once again that cycle. I had to come back, and I've been here for 4 years, but it's totally different now. Before I had a stability, now it's like, all right, what am I doing here in the US? So it's all that revolved around that.
Thank you so much. Yes.
The prompt is a story about that.
Yeah.
And apologies that I was late. My name is Michael, he, him pronouns. When I was in April of 2014, I paid off my student loans. And in May of 2014, I took a family vacation down to Charleston, South Carolina. And in June of 2014, I spent $400 on sailing lessons on the Chesapeake Bay. In July of 2014, me and my partner went to New Orleans. And after that, I started saving money. But sometimes I think about that, I think about all of the joy deferred, because we're using our monthly income to send to our creditors instead of doing things like going to Jazz Fest, Charleston, or taking sailing lessons.
Hey everybody, Chris, he, him, from Chester. I grew up with Dana a little bit. And so Chester has, between 1950 and 1980, used a third of our entire employee workforce. That we in this thing called Act 47 in PA. Been in it forever, right? And the importance of that, right, is that in this neoliberal culture, the PA state idea was, well, we just need to lower the business taxes, and business is going to come in and save them. So in the early 90s, we had a lot of toxic waste industries come into Chester. We're still fighting against many of them now. And the idea was that these were incentivized by the state in order for Chester to be able to pay its debt or its pensions, right? Many of that which goes to the police. And that challenge was realized in a point where we had a free asthma camp because of the toxicity that was in the air from the toxic waste companies that were incentivized by the state. So.
Wow.
Everyone, everyone. My name's Dan, he, him. So I just wrote it down so I don't forget, but I guess. The whole debt thing kind of hit me halfway through college. I was in a program for a profession I didn't really care for, but I was in it so far and had taken student loans that I couldn't change course. So I realized that I was kind of stuck to finish this program so that I would have a job that would pay me well enough. And then at some point I did the math and realized how much of my income was just going to pay the debt. And that was horrifying, but it was also a trap. So I just realized that that was the only option I had. So when I graduated, I paid for several years like a good boy and just took care of it. And then it started to hit me that the balance wasn't going down, and all of that money was an opportunity to do so many other things. I could have started a business, could have bought a home, could have helped my family, I could have gone to college for something I cared about, and things like that. And I just realized that I was kind of like serving the debt, like half of my labor was going to pay a bank that didn't care about me. So I stopped paying, but that's complicated.
Wow. Yes.
Hi there, my name's Erica, and she, her pronouns. I grew up right in this area, and I'm not in college now, so I'm college age, and I was just having a discussion with my parents who are divorced the other day about their expectations and what I'm doing. I'm a professional activist. I'm being laid off this month. Anyways, that's a whole other story. But my parents have had a tricky. My dad didn't go to college or didn't graduate from college, and he was talking about the stresses of. He works at WRGI, a radio station, and has a job that he knew he wouldn't be able to pay for like college or contribute. And my mom was going to ask him like, "How are you going to contribute?" And he was just like, "Well, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that she gets to go to college for free." And it's like, okay, like that obviously isn't really a plan. And just also my partner also going to college for quite a long time and dropping out very close to graduating and not being able to go back until she pays off those debts as also a teacher, preschool teacher.
Wow. Yes. Thank you.
Just real quick, Jason, him. First off, fuck Wells Fargo Bank, if you're listening. You guys foreclosed on my dad's house and didn't let us take anything out of it. Quick story, my dad was dying of cancer. Last 3 weeks of his life, I had the good fortune of being with him as he got kicked out of 3 hospitals because the insurance wouldn't cover it. And every night I'd sit up late with them and we'd look at clocks. And one time I was finally like, "Dad, why do you keep staring at the clocks on the wall?" He's like, "Because for every 24 hours I make it, that allows a little bit more pension money to come in, and it's going to help you guys when I'm gone take care of some of these bills." So yeah, that's that.
Yeah. I just also, I'm Chenjerai, my pronouns are he, him, just to say that. I said that. Before we kind of get into the craft part of this, I just want to say that I just want to honor really people bringing in their own experiences in the room, right? People, this is not theoretical, right? So I just want to honor that, and I hope that folks were able to feel something in the sort of collective sharing of that all these different ways. You know, I did. So
I need the empowering side of these stories before we go.
yeah, we need to see how we're transforming this into like this.
I don't know.
That is a part.
Right.
Yeah, we need to be. We need the revolution part. And yeah, so let me also say, so you know, moving in that direction. Actually, what I want to sort of move toward in the short time that we have together is, I like everybody to. We're going to move toward everyone kind of maybe taking that moment or something about that moment and building at least like a short outline of what a story might look like. And that's kind of what I think is doable in this time. And I'm going to share a few thoughts from the story craft side about how to think about that. And maybe we'll share one example from a debt assembly. So a few things to think about. Again, one thing I want to also acknowledge about the stories that went around is how some stories are really personal, individual, and some stories are actually more structural, right? Like in terms of what they're actually looking at. And I think that that's really important for us to have a range of those if we want to capture and unleash the revolutionary potential of debt stories, right? We don't want these just to be stories about how we failed to get into the capitalist system at a higher level, right? It's not, I think, where a lot of us are coming from. So the first thing is, I think for a lot of us who think a lot about structures and systems, one of the things that can be hard is to slow things down. But one of the things that I've learned from really gifted storytellers and writers is a basic lesson that all of us probably learned at some point in our education, which is the showing, putting the burden on showing rather than telling. One of the things that in narrative nonfiction podcasters have learned, and one reason why some of these podcasts, I'm not talking about like the chat show podcast, but the sort of storytelling ones I've learned is that people want to feel like they're arriving at the conclusions on their own. When you tell people, when people feel like they're being told what to think up front, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It blocks something in the storytelling process. Even if you're 100% right, you could be saying, you know what I'm saying? You could be saying 1 + 1 is 2. People are like, oh. You know what I'm saying? They want to go on a journey, right? And so part of the challenge that we have to do is to think about how to bake the structures that we want to show into the journey. You know, when I made Uncivil, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be like a sort of, I have to walk the thing. When I was on making Uncivil, I worked with like a team of really dope writers, and I was making 2 podcasts simultaneously. One was called Scene on Radio. That was a history of, that season was a history of kind of like whiteness and racial ideas. And the structure of that podcast was we would kind of do some reporting on a part of history, and then we would have a conversation about it. And in conversation, we could kind of explain a lot of stuff, right? So it took some burden off the reporting in the first part, because we could explain stuff at the end. When I did Uncivil, I was around writers who hated to explain things. They were like, if you have to explain anything after you told this story, you failed. You know what I'm saying? They were like, show it in a detail. You know, if the issue is, I want to be, you know, doing radical activist work, but instead I have to like be in nursing school, right? What is the moment in nursing school where you're feeling that? How can you bring us into the moment when you're seeing, you know, the police cars go up in flames on the street in front of your house, you know what I'm saying? And you're like, man, I want to be joining the movement, but I can't, you know what I'm saying? Just bring us into that moment and show us the structure through the moment. So there's some space that has to be about what is the detail. And what I think that means for us is some of it is about slowing down and trusting that. I think sometimes we can be very distrustful that the details can do the work. I was when I was learning this craft, right? I was like, no, I have to explain it. But I would say before you might have to. But what I would say is that explanation will land better if you've already shown it, for one. And 2, don't underestimate what you can show through details. I'm just thinking of the stories in the room, right? I'm just thinking of the asthma, right? What if how could you make that a story about a person? And it's tricky. Again, I should say there's a larger discourse of storytelling out here that is, you know, neoliberalism has, where stories are a really good way to reduce everything down to the individual, and we stop seeing the structures. So that's the dance that we always have to fight against, right? And yet, I think the way people's minds at least have been trained to work, I don't know if it's human nature or sociology, whatever it is, people think about those smaller moments, those individual moments, and they see structures through that. They see the structures in the intimate moments. So for each of you, begin to think about that. The second thing I would say as you think about building this outline, again, think you gotta think about where you're gonna start. Now, the kind of trick here that comes from the sort of public radio storytelling world is that we plunge people into a situation right from the beginning. That's because we know we're on the radio, right? We know we're like, yeah, we compete with TikTok, we compete with all, you know what I'm saying? People can it's real easy to turn the radio, so we gotta grab you in a situation. But the situation doesn't have to be big. It just has to be something that just makes you, if you've ever had that moment where you're like, I'm gonna listen to this for like another minute just to see what happens. So what is the moment where you start? Is the thing to think about. What's the beginning? Where do you come in? And the key thing is, what is the central conflict? So I want to talk about the conflict, and I want to talk about conflicts around debt a little bit for you to think about. Think about this in your question, like each of you, what you mentioned. If you're, if it's, a person's medical debt, there's a thing that's come up. What is the conflict at the core of it? We'll see some examples where, or at least one example where, in the debt assemblies, often one really brilliant strategy I've seen people use is they talk about something that they wanted, right? They talk about, I gave you the example earlier, this woman said, I want to create a better house infrastructure for my son, right? So that's what she wants. Now she's going to encounter a debt conflict where she goes to school, she tries to do, and then the debt comes, and then the debt stops her from doing that. So the story on one level is two things, right? It's her struggle with the debt. And we see that, and we see where it is, like this phone call you had, right? There's a moment of conflict there where there's something going on with the debt industry that you might show through the call. But there's also what we need to see, I think, for example, in your story is, what did it stop you from doing that you wanted? Because that's what a lot of people are going to relate to, right? Because now it's like, oh man, we're thinking about the woman's son, we're thinking about her ability to care for him, etc., right? So for each of you, there's a thing that you have to begin to think about. Maybe you haven't thought about your stories in these terms, but it's a way to think about it. Now, you might be like, that has affected me so many ways. There's all kinds of things I want. This brings us to another thing. Got to choose details. Can't do everything with one story. You can do everything with a range of stories, but it's better if you kind of shape it around a particular thing that would have been nice. So, you have a person, yourself, or someone else. I mean, the Moss rule is it should be about you. That's the Moss rule. It has to be your story. Let someone else tell their story. I don't necessarily think that applies to every content. You have a person who wants a thing. They encounter a conflict around debt that stops them from getting the thing that they want. And then this kind of moves, I wouldn't say it resolves, but it moves to another level. Maybe it moves into them fighting, maybe it moves into them how they've joined this movement. It leads to certainly a call to action, right? So think about those elements, how each of those things, how you can sort of bake those elements into your story. But I think really spend some time thinking about what the central conflict is, because that's where I think a lot of political work, powerful political work we're doing, but how you dictate the conflict. I want to talk about how we're going to give each other feedback and how we'll proceed, but is there any questions? Anybody wants to throw a comment? Everybody wants to jump in real quick? Yes, go ahead. Or challenges, right?
Yeah. No challenges today. Some ears pricked up when you said add a call to action piece. Because when you said that, I went back to like Brother Chris was saying, we're down. But I can't actually think of an action. I'm not sure a lot of us have a call to action to make, so maybe we can workshop. If you want that in our stories, I would love to have a little bit of a discussion about what kind of call to action I could put in it. It all still feels really, I mean, I get it intellectually, but it feels very individual.
Yeah.
I totally hear that, yeah. And Chris, did you want to say something?
No, I totally affirm like that. How to tell a call to action is just like, make a call, do the thug, like that sort of like one thing you can do. Right, that sort of thing.
Contribute to Democrats.
Right.
That's the challenge though.
Yeah, well, no, this is a great point because, it could be that the call to action needs to be specific to particular campaigns or tactics. Yeah. Like for one moment, it was like a call to Biden, as sickening as that might be for some people quickly. But that I think tactically, I respect that if that's the goal of that particular campaign, right? So, but in another space, that call to action might need to be a different way. But I think we can kind of think about that flexibly, so we can think about that. So here's what I want to do. I want to play an example, about 3 minutes of a debt story that was part of the debt assembly. And you can see how some of these principles are at work. And then we're going to all maybe talk with each other about our stories briefly. And then we can kind of share what we got out of that, if that works. One thing I want to call attention to, this is, I think the person we're going to hear from, her name is Jen Lazan. One thing I want you to think about is, we all, in the context of these debt of these stories, every story you have to choose your details very carefully. There's a tendency, if you're somebody like me who talks too much, you want to tell every detail. You're like, when I grew up, in another scene, I'm giving you every detail about my life. Every story becomes my whole biography. In the context of this work, your details are political weapons, right? What do you want to show people with those details, What do you want to show people? So you got to choose them carefully. And just know that from the standpoint of momentum, the more details you pile on there, people's attention starts to wane. You really only need one, maximum two details to do particular work. You're telling people I came up in a working class environment, two details to show that. Choose which ones you want to show us. The school system, is it who had education in your family? Is it racial discrimination? You feel what I'm saying? When you're talking about how the debt made you feel, what details do you want to give us? Is it your personal reaction? Is it, something you didn't do? What is the specific thing you didn't do? Let us see it. This is the kind of pressure I think we have to put on our stories to do that work, right? That's going to really make them land. But let's just hear from just to see this example at work. So this was a workshop that was set up by I don't know who was actually set up. It was Debt Collective. Yeah. Do you know much about this, Jason? Want to give some context? What you said now?
This is with Ariana.
It was with Ayanna Presley, and she was kind of creating a platform for people to share, and lots of folks shared.
One second.
Yeah, you got it. You said play. Yeah, and yeah. Is this? Did I turn this up? Yeah. Okay, gotcha. It's about 3 minutes.
And Jen works with Debt Collective on a lot of art and design projects, and Jen's a big member of the Debtors Union on the national level, coming out of Chicago.
So let me just take a moment to switch over to the live stream so that they're not looking at us, looking at something else, and then feedback loop and stuff. So
Right.
let me see if I can play it for them first.
the end, Jen starts to make some sort of claims where she's definitely telling you, some portion of analysis, but it lands differently because of the journey we've gone on with it, right? Oh, yeah, sorry. Also, just to say, and by the way, can you hear me? Is this, I don't like. Oh, yeah, okay. So also, that was about 3 minutes. There's a lot of work done in 3 minutes, right? Stories don't have to be long, right? It's like 4, and then we learn a little bit about her circumstances, right? We see that, in her conflict had to do a lot with wanting to better her circumstances. Although I think that in the range of stories here, I think there's a lot of interesting conflicts that could do different types of political work that came up here. But I just want to show you that was a thing. And so when she talks about how the debt she got later, you see how it interfered with that. You could imagine how a family felt, and all those things affect, how it lands later when she really starts to talk about the larger problem. Also, she does kind of have a call to action where she shows us the movement coming together. Right? Yep. That only happens in the last minute of the story, or like 2 minutes, you know what I'm saying? Like happens toward the end. But it's how, again, she does include it, and she kind of zooms way out. So her call to action, which is just one answer to the question that we're kind of exploring here, is kind of like a big zoom out to the movement, but I think it works because the personal part later. You see what I'm saying? I mean, there was earlier. So, all right. I just feel like maybe can we just get like any other observations people want to make about the story? They thought things they like, things they're worried about, because I want to give us a chance to work on our outlines. Any other things folks want to say? Okay. All right. Well, let's do this. Can we choose a partner quickly in the room? Person next to you. And why don't you try to just take, oh man, because we're supposed to be done at 6:30?
Yeah.
Oh man. All right. Well, let's do it like this. Why don't we do 8 minutes maybe? Why don't we take 8 minutes and just try to have a conversation with your partner about the story you shared, how you can actually render it into a story format, and maybe just think about a couple of bullet points. Where does it start? Where does it end? What are you trying to show? And then let's come back in the last 5 minutes. Maybe a few people can share their examples. Does that sound good? Okay, cool. Let's go. I'll let you know in 8 minutes. Yeah, I guess we can move around, right? Yeah, somewhere else.
Yeah.
Interesting scenario.
All right, everybody, we're gonna come back together. Jason.
Yeah, just real quick before we share out some of the stories, two announcements. One having to do with like, okay, what do we do? What's to be done? Last question. Please consider, if you haven't already, joining the debtors union, debtcollective.org. We have a lot of different campaigns around different debt types, and we also have a debt strike. Some people in the room that are on debt strike right now, I won't name who. Maybe they want to name that, but they're refusing to pay these unjust debts. So debtcollective.org, Pennsylvania branch, if you're in the area, definitely interested in meeting more often, talking with them. The other thing I want to say is that a lot of good stuff around storytelling is in this book that Making Worlds is selling right now, How to Tell a Story. And it features the introduction that's really good by you, Chenjerai. So if you want to pick up one of these, please do. That can go to the front desk for those who want How to Tell a Story. I'm not sure who's the publisher. We can look it up. Anyways, it's a good book. I started reading it the other day. So yeah, Chenjerai.
Yeah, well, thanks, and I think we want to try to close out, being respectful of time. I think the struggles of time show two things. One, my poor time management, but more importantly, there's a lot of work to be done. We need more time for this, and so I just want to thank everybody. Is there anything in the couple of minutes that we have left? Actually, before we go to that, let me say this. We're going to share 2 links out. Make sure we have your contact information, because we're going to share. We can share this whole video of debt stories if you want to see it. I think you should, just to see the way that different people tell the stories. There's a tremendous story on student debt that was done by Reveal that I think is also a good example. And then Maddie with Debt Collective is a really powerful organizer. Maddie is writing, as they have something that's going to drop in Truth Out tomorrow about the debt story that I think is really, I would encourage. So we're going to send those resources out for folks to think about. But what came up in your conversations? Do we have a couple of people share briefly some things that you learned or realized about this stage? At least, obviously, we encourage, but some stage, yeah.
One thing that kind of came up about the system, I suppose, like in telling my story, is realizing that it was all it was very simple to get into this situation. And I started college, didn't have enough money. My parents weren't wealthy. So I'm going to the financial aid office and I say, okay, what am I supposed to do? The lady hands me a form. She says, fill this out. And a couple weeks later, I've got private for-profit school tuition in my bank account. And from that moment on, I'm an indentured servant to that debt, more or less. Every decision I make from that point on is based on that. So I could either choose to not pay it and, descend into, poverty or something, or continue with school and, just enter the system that way. So it's just a very simple 10-minute process that was really mundane and without a second thought. And everything after that is what we're talking about here.
That's so powerful. Yeah, I just want to say that I think even that from a obviously that's, I don't want to limit it to the narrative component, but even as a narrative, I just felt it land the way you said it. Just talking about that, how simple it was, right? This thing that you do in this quick moment, and then process, and then it really affects your life. Yeah.
My dad gave me before.
What else? What else came up for people? Does someone else want to give an example of what came up in your sort of workshopping, your story or experience? Yes.
Yeah, so what's your name again?
John.
John and I, he, him, John, he, him, Paul, he, him as well. What we ended up talking about that I thought was really cool, and we both kind of touched on it, was shame, right? And shame associated with that and how that can be limited. And what's interesting about that from a storytelling perspective is, and you brought it up too, with your mother, that is it's a very common feeling, right? It's a very common feeling, whether you're upset because you know you have to go into debt and you don't want that, or you're worried about your credit score, or you're worried about whatever, right? That shame that you feel is very common, and there's a reason for that shame, right? There's a reason that the people who loan you the money want you to feel that shame, because if you feel that shame, you're gonna be more likely to wanna pay. So kind of diving into that feeling of shame and making those connections, I feel like there's a lot of potential there, right, from a storytelling perspective. Anything to add? No? Okay, cool.
All right, well, yes, absolutely, and I think, and I would say, I would just add, and also thinking about where in your life does that shame show up? You know, what does it look like? You know what I mean? How we can show it. Jason and I were just once again revisiting the question of how do we take these stories and transform them into power, really, right? And I think that that's a really good question that we're gonna think through more. I will say that people are so private about debt that I do think one really important thing not to miss is just literally learning how debt is working by sharing our collective stories, by just connecting the dots, right? And especially, as Jason was bringing up, we at least have a powerful campaign on student debt. But what about medical debt? What about all the other kinds of debt, right? So I think that there's work to be done to first understand and then actually craft those campaigns. And this is a really important part of it. So let's keep it up, folks. I'll let you know, we're all really busy, but if you want to do a part 2 to this and take it further, bring some more folks in, I will come, I will come down and join and participate. Yeah.
And I just want to say one thing about that too, that in Philadelphia in particular, we're going to have a pretty extensive, 3-year period where Philadelphia Student Union, Black Lives Matter Philly, Debt Collective is going to be hosting different events like this that are meant to be participatory, that are meant to be educative, and that are meant to build power. So that's a 3-year project that we know for sure is going to happen. We're going to get that rolling probably in February. So if you're interested in that as well, please be in touch with us. And then I just want to say too, around, we do have these other campaigns going with Debt Collective. And I want to end by saying one thing that we always say, that I know we've talked a lot about too, the wordplay here about you are not alone. No one here and no one watching is reduced to the debts that they owe. You are much more than that, obviously, and you are not alone. There are many of us. And if we can come together, then we own the banks, we own the system. And there's a lot that they're afraid of. So once again, Chenjerai, thank you so much. Amazing World, thank you so much. Common Notions, thank you so much. For those of you watching, thank you for tuning in. Our next event is January 27th. Andrew Ross and Julie Livingston, they'll be talking about their new book on car debt. It'll be here at Making Worlds. It'll also be streamed. Thanks for coming out, everybody, and hope to see you soon. Take care.
I just thought about continuation.